everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is someone I'm genuinely excited to speak with, Dr. Cynthia Mathieu. Is that correct? Mathieu?
Yes, perfect.
Good. Close.
Wow,
Oh, not so bad.
You haven't lost your French.
Well, I only recently came across her work, and it immediately hit a nerve in the best possible way, because Dr. Mathieu is a psychologist and professor of organizational behavior who specializes in what's often called dark leadership, the presence of psychopathic traits in corporate and institutional environments. In other words, she studies the wolves in suits. Now, if you've been following my work, whether through the vow or the conversations I've had on this podcast, you know I've had a front row seat to the damage caused by psychopathic and narcissistic individuals in positions of power. My experience exposing NXIVM and Keith Raniere showed me just how invisible, insidious, and systemically protected these personalities can be. Dr. Mathieu brings scientific clarity to what many survivors have felt but couldn't quite name. Her work explores how these traits show up in leaders, how organizations often fail to recognize or address them, and the real emotional and psychological fallout for those caught in their web. Oh, also, she's the author of a book, which is called Dark Personalities in the Workplace, and I'll put the link in the show notes below. Dr. Mathieu, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. First of all, did I leave anything out? Is there anything that I left out?
It's too much, so it's perfect.
Too much.
Yeah. And you can call me Cynthia.
Cynthia, perfect, yes. Perfect. Cynthia, the thing I'm always interested in is why this? I mean, what the hell? Why? What happened that this is of interest to you? Did something happen? What occurred?
I have an odd background. So I was doing my PhD in clinical psychology on intimate partner abuse. And then I did a postdoctoral degree studying psychopathy and violence. And also I was working as an IO psychologist within organizations, and I was working with employees at an employee assistance program. And I was hearing about cases where people were coming to me with burnout symptoms, and they were describing someone harassing them. And when they were describing them, for me, it just ticked all of the boxes with what I was studying, doing my postdoc on psychopathy. And I started thinking, what if these individuals that I study in a forensic setting, right? They were all in prison. What if some of these individuals are able to manipulate their way within society and in our organizations? And that really was the spark for it, because I realized that while organizations were working on trying to understand better some of the unethical behaviors going on, they were never looking into personality traits. And I thought maybe I'll be one of the first ones to really kind of link both.
That's really interesting, because I didn't really understand a lot about narcissism and psychopathy so much in the sort of workplace environment. And so when I got out of my cult, I began studying narcissism in relationships and narcissistic abuse. And it was interesting because I looked at the narcissistic abuse cycle in a relationship, and I thought, oh my God, that's the microcosm of the bigger version that happens in groups.
Exactly.
It blew my mind, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the link that I made, and it was, and it's exactly the same modus operandi. They operate exactly in the same way with their targets.
That's so interesting. I have so many questions. Hey, quick interlude. If you're liking these conversations and want to help me keep expressing what is on my mind, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and maybe even follow the podcast wherever you listen. And if you want to go a step further in supporting the show and getting access to some behind-the-scenes rants, you can join me over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Mark Vicente. It really does make a difference. All right, back to the episode. Well, okay, so just back up a second. So you saw this, and then
I contacted Robert Hare thinking he might not reply, right? Robert Hare's
Godfather.
oh yeah. Well, I say that to him, and of course
He
he
doesn't
doesn't.
like it.
No, he doesn't
Apparently,
like
yeah.
Godfather,
Yeah.
but I say he prefers Father of modern psychopathy. But yeah, and he had just published a book with Dr. Paul Babiak, Snakes in Suits, one of the first books on corporate psychopathy. And I started talking to them about creating a measure of psychopathy and really understanding, are these the same people that we see in prison settings, like the 1%, in the population? What does it look like within organizations? And that's when I started working with them. I've been working with them for 15 years. So
That's
we're
amazing.
still doing research
That's
together. Yes.
amazing. Do you know that my cult leader had us study, not all of us, some of us, had us study Robert Hare's work?
Really?
Yes. That is how
In
messed up
what
it was.
way?
Because he talked about psychopaths in the system. He says, if a psychopath infects the system, nobody will know where it's coming from. And so he had us studying psychopathy. We were literally studying him. It was sort of, he loved practical jokes. Like he loved tricks and jokes, and he would do
Hmm.
them. He could do practical jokes for months, sometimes years. I think he just enjoyed having us study something and not being able to see, but also because I think he thought if we study that, it'll inoculate us against seeing that it's him. Because
Hmm.
why would he give that to us to read? Clearly, he's not that person. He's a good person trying to warn us about the dangers of these people,
Right. Right.
It's pretty messed up.
How interesting. How
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, and that is why it's not easy to study psychopathy, because if you have all the items out there, then everybody is able to understand it, and then it makes it easier to fake uh not being a psychopath, during
Yeah.
job selection or leader selection interviews, right?
Yeah. I'm going to jump around a bit because I had a list of questions, but I'm
Yes.
suddenly thinking about something. One of the problems I'm seeing is these people can present as incredibly confident.
Hmm.
And I see again and again, certainly I was fooled by this. And because I was fooled by this, now I see it in the world. I see people looking at political leaders on television. They go like, oh my God, I like her, I like him. And I'm like, you shouldn't. They're so confident it's scary.
Hmm.
They have it's flat affect,
Hmm.
and they're so sure of themselves. What have you found in looking at how people fall for that kind of certainty? Because it seems comforting to some people.
Right. I think there's a difference between self-confidence and lack of humility. So that's
Mm,
one of the red flags, right? So usually when people are self-confident, they are, but not in everything that they do. And when you ask them
mm,
about how, why it is that they're confident about something, they'll back it up with facts, right? The difference is, if you look at narcissists and psychopaths, it's not self-confidence, it's lack of humility. So they believe that they are better than others, but it's not backed by any facts. And if you look at why they believe that, it's just ingrained in their thought process. And if you point to failures, they will just blame others. So there was this one study on narcissism where they had everyone do a test, and everybody passed. It was tricked. So everybody had, and then they asked, how do you feel about, your results? And then people were saying, well, I did pretty well. Everything went well. I guess, it was easy for me, and then they did it again and everybody failed. And the difference was that narcissists, it didn't change the way they viewed themselves. It didn't change the way that they saw they saw, how they did in the task. They blamed the system, they blamed the computer, they blamed probably a glitch, probably. So they're unable to see their
mm.
failures. So I think that's where people, I think they feel safe looking at leaders who seem self-confident, but most people don't understand the difference between self-confident but able to learn from your mistakes, which is a sign of a good leader, from I'm better than others.
Right. Because what you're describing in the lack of humility, so they feel uh, confident across all contexts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. They in their looks, in their ability to find a mate, in in anything that they do at work, which makes it extremely difficult for other leaders to manage, or even for their teams to manage. Right?
Right. I want to just, before we move ahead, I just want, if you could just describe the difference between narcissism and psychopathy. Like, how do you see the difference?
Um, there's a lot of elements that are very similar, right? Somebody studied the core of darkness, looking at the elements that are similar, and callousness is one between psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. So callousness and manipulation would be, I guess, the common traits. One of the differences between psychopathy and narcissism is really the inability for psychopaths to experience a number of emotions. And that has been proven with brain scans, and so there is something that prevents them from understanding emotions such as fear, joy, love, and to a certain point, anxiety. So it makes them so. That's why, I mean, Robert Hare or other experts would say that they don't have a conscience. They don't see the difference between right and wrong at all. Whereas narcissists do. They just choose
Mm,
not to follow it, the rules if it doesn't suit them. Psychopaths don't see the difference between lying and telling the truth, between right and
right.
wrong. So there is something there that is different. Narcissists are very low on empathy towards others. Psychopaths cannot feel empathy. So there there are some differences
Right.
there.
So do a narcissist are capable of agreeableness, perhaps, where psychopaths maybe not?
True. They're
Mm,
capable of faking it a little bit better. Psychopaths, because they're unable to understand their own emotions and other people's emotions, it makes it a little more difficult. They can fake some things, but they're not very likely to fake empathy. They're not very likely to be able to fake caring for others or understanding others. So they score lower on emotion. In our studies, they psychopaths score lower on emotional intelligence than narcissists do.
that's interesting. So I did not know. So they're not capable of sort of analyzing their own emotions
No.
versus a narcissist, because I've spoken to some self-confessed narcissists that do have an awareness of
Mm-hmm.
what's, to some degree, of what's going on
Right.
internally.
Right. Right. They're unable to understand emotions other than understanding the words, but they don't experience them.
Hmm.
So when they're able to manipulate, actually, in prison settings, I can't remember, maybe 20 years ago, they've stopped uh, having psychopaths participate in group therapy, because it actually increased the risk of recidivism, in terms of violence. They were learning from other inmates about emotions, and it made them better manipulators. So yeah, and also they're different in their crimes, in the sense that the psychopath's violence or aggression is not necessarily related to the ego. Whereas for the narcissist, they oftentimes become aggressive when they feel that their ego is threatened. When someone,
Oh,
yeah. For psychopaths, it's very impulsive. It's whenever it's whenever they have the opportunity to be violent, they will be violent. So it's not necessarily an ego threat response.
that is interesting. Yeah, because,
Hmm.
okay, so their egos don't get bent out of shape if you say something to a psychopath.
Not really.
Right. Whereas with a narcissist, you could trigger their shame or
Right,
whatever,
right,
and
right,
they'll, yeah.
right. For psychopaths, I mean, they will get aggressive if you contradict them, but it's not because their ego has been shattered or affected. It's because they just don't like being questioned.
Do you try in your work over the years, do you ever try to sort of inhabit what it feels like inside of them?
I haven't focused on that as much because I've haven't been looking so much into the clinical aspect or intervention with them, but more of the how do they enter organizations? How do they manipulate their way into leadership positions? But I have read, yeah, others have, and it's very interesting. But I think um, from what I read, I think what you're doing, you were mentioning kind of interviewing individuals. I think that uh, is amazing. I haven't seen so much of that kind of understanding how it feels like
Yeah.
in the different research that's out there on psychopathy.
Yeah. I will tell you my experience when I try to imagine being them, I always come up with a blank. And sometimes I'll say, well, I feel this, and what do you feel? And they're like, not that. So it's almost like I'm trying to imagine being a robot,
Right,
and I can't.
right. And I mean, Robert Hare calls them, so, human predators or social predators, right? So it's really kind of the way that they see the world is predator and prey. So you're either or, right?
Right. 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 Right.
And they don't feel guilt at all, ever. So that's one of the emotions that they don't feel. So imagine, that's what I try to tell people. Imagine living your life not ever feeling guilty, not ever feeling sorry for others, no empathy, no fear. It's very hard to imagine because we're
Yeah.
programmed usually to feel emotions and see the
Yeah.
world through our emotions and our thoughts. And our emotions have an impact on our thoughts as well, right? So if you don't experience emotions, then it's just thought. It's just
That's
thinking.
interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, which might explain in the case of my cult leader who was so mechanical in his thinking.
Hmm. Right.
Um,
So it's
and I can
and
never understand why you can just feel it. Why do you have to explain all the feelings, you know?
I love what you just said. One of the red flags that I tell people is exactly that, is when you listen to the person and they tell you about something and there should be emotions there. So the they're saying the right words, but you feel a disconnect. You feel a disconnect, right? Robert Hare would say, they know the words but not the music. So they
Mm.
say all the right things, but because they can't experience it, they don't really know how to connect with their emotions because they obviously can't experience them. So it's
Yes.
interesting because the words are all there and they're very good manipulators, but you feel that there's a disconnect. There's no emotion even in the face. The visual, the facial emotions are not there either.
Yes. That makes perfect sense. And the thing that I did, under the tutelage of a psychopath, was I projected and filled in all the emotions that I thought he might be feeling and later realized he's not feeling any of the things.
Mm-hmm.
So I imbued in him more humanity than was there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
which maybe a lot of people do that.
Well, I think that's one of the ways that they manipulate, right? Is because they view emotions as a weakness, so they use it. They don't understand them, but they know the power that they can have. If they say this, they can trigger that. If they say that, they can trigger something else. So I think a lot
Yeah.
of people have a hard time first understanding what psychopathic individuals are, who they are, how they work. And so they do what you just said. They fill in the blank, right?
Yes. Yes. So let's talk about these personalities in the workplace. Like what happens in the workplace when these people work their way in and up?
Well, it's pretty easy for them to to get into the organization. The way that selection interviews are structured, if you look at all of the research on biases, I mean, we've spent a lot of the last decade looking at negative biases, right? Trying to eliminate negative biases. But I keep telling people we also need to look at positive biases. So what are the positive biases? These people come in, they're not anxious. That's one, right? They don't feel anxiety and they love being the center of attention. So of course, during an interview, and some of the positive biases that we have is lack of anxiety equals self-assurance, intelligence. There is a link between people who look self-confident and the perception that this person has a higher IQ, right? And we also think that, if they are impressive, if they're charismatic, if they can lead during an interview, because they often do, they eventually end up leading the interview. When they lead during the interview, then that's a sure sign of future leadership success. And so they are favored. They easily get in, and then they start manipulating. They understand how the organization works. They start looking for people they can manipulate, who has power. Then they get close to people who have power, and then they climb up the ladder. They're always looking for power and control, right? I did a study last year. We were looking at psychopathy and success. And interestingly, we found that what they view as success is different from people who score lower on psychopathy. They think that success is power, control, and fear. Fear was a very big element of being successful in society. So it kind of, if you transfer that to leadership, it's a pretty scary it's a pretty scary
That's
portrait.
interesting. The more people that are afraid of me, the more
Yes.
successful I am.
Yes. Yeah. So they see that, and that may be different from narcissists. Narcissists have partly that, but they're mostly looking for fame, success, and they are not looking to be respected. They're not looking to be loved. They just want to be admired and feared. That's what they are looking for. So they don't care if people don't think they're good. They're good people. They don't share the same values as most individuals. So yeah.
Right. And then I'm thinking, and I'm sure you've seen this, that, if you're a shareholder, you want somebody like that in charge because they will make money.
That is the thing I've heard the most when I talk about I've been talking about corporate psychopathy for 15 years, and that is what I hear the most. People saying, well, aren't those traits things that you're looking for? And we worked on Paul Babiak worked on connecting psychopathic traits to leadership traits. One of the things that he was talking about is how we confuse charm and charisma with leadership skills. How we confuse the psychopath, talking about lofty goals and making, grandiose promises with, well, this person has a vision. Cunning and manipulation. Wow, they'll be able to influence others. Lack of remorse. They'll be able to make, difficult decisions. Their impulsivity. Oh, wow, they're able to take action very quickly if there's a problem. And then you can see their lack of emotion as, wow, great emotional control. That's what you need in a leader. So it's easy to confuse some of those skills if you don't go beyond, beyond the basic kind of HR training and confuse these skills with good leadership skills.
Yes. Oh my God. Okay. So, there's so many places I want to go. Okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, so from a purely capitalistic viewpoint, and the shareholders, they want the company to make money. So they want the biggest, baddest psychopath
Right.
in control.
Right.
What does it do to the culture of the company then? And by the culture, I mean like the organism
I'm
of the.
so happy you're asking, because from studying these individuals for the past year and a half, I've been shifting to, I'm still studying them, but shifting to their impact on cultures. And we've been talking about um, corporate cultures and toxic cultures. And a lot of the stuff that's being done is looking at, let's add a little bit of, yoga sessions or pizza nights or things
Yes.
like that, right? Looking at
Yes.
adding, HR perks to what's going on in the organization. And I rarely see organizations who are ready to actually look at the causes, because the causes often come, from the top, right? And when you do, then you realize that these individuals are there for a reason, and organizations might want to keep them there because in the short term they can bring profit, probably. I
Mm.
mean, they'll squeeze everything that they can out of employees. They'll make promises. They'll threaten employees. They'll threaten their collaborators into doing business with them. I mean, these things, if you trigger fear, people are going to react, right? And oftentimes you get what you want, but how long does that last? The damages in the long run are
Yes.
horrible for organizations.
Yes. So, not having done the research you've done, but I'm thinking about like when I was in a cult, you don't really realize it until you get out, but like everybody was terrified.
Right.
Everybody was afraid. Everybody was mentally unhealthy, yes, but also a lot of sickness, a lot of illness, a lot of immune system issues that people had.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, yeah.
Did people know they were afraid? Or
No,
okay, and this
no.
did they actually feel kind of a fake sense of safety?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So there was because the thing is, if you felt fear, it was just a problem that the educational system needed to solve.
Mhm.
And also to feel certain feelings was weakness. So the whole system was designed that if you felt just the human things you should feel, that was a problem. So it was this interesting self-sealing system where any normal natural feelings were bad. But the thing I keep thinking about is just how unhappy everybody was. And like I'll walk into a store sometimes and I'm not going to name it, there's a particular coffee shop that my wife and I have walked into sometimes. Everybody's miserable. They're quiet. They're walking on eggshells. And we would walk out and saying, there's a psychopath running this place. And none of them know it. So that's what I've seen in these situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never looked at like large corporations. But this is the human cost, right, of these people.
Absolutely. What we see is higher levels of burnout, anxiety, job-related stress, presenteeism. So people are there physically, mentally, they're unable to perform well. You get high turnover, high employee turnover. So and eventually a reduction in employee productivity. And that's the thing that corporations don't understand is happy and healthy employees are going to be way more productive. And again, a lot of them are looking short term. What can we get? But you miss the big picture where they want an employee engagement. You don't get that from fear. You don't get that from fear. And that's the thing, like you were saying, and that's why I asked the question, because I'm very interested in also understanding what makes people blind to some of the behaviors. At first, I think the manipulation is really good, but once the mask starts to crack, why is it that people, they see it, but there's a disconnect between what they see and what they want to believe?
Hmm. We
And
could do a whole nother podcast on that one. Yeah. Because I mean, I'm obsessed with that question because I
Mhm.
was in that position,
Right.
woke up, and I still have people that I care about that are still stuck inside the mindset.
Hmm.
My leader's in prison now for 120 years. There are still people loyal to him. They just refuse to see.
Hmm.
So that's fascinating. Um, just to make a distinction now, I mean, this is a kind of a how-to question. Um, like, how can somebody distinguish between like a tough boss and a truly dark personality? Are there, like, how do you determine which is which?
I think there's intention, but that's very difficult to identify, right? I think a tough boss, if he's a good boss, can be tough but fair. They'll still want you to succeed. They'll give you the support and the means to succeed, but they will set the bar high for you. But
Mm.
they'll usually try to help you get there. That would be a good leader that's tough but good. But then um the psychopathic leader doesn't want you to succeed for yourself. They want success for themselves. So if they push you, they don't push you for the good of the organization, the good of the team, or for your career. They're pushing you for their career, so that you work well to
Right.
make them look good. There's also that lack of empathy that's there. And so you can be a tough boss, but still care about your employees. Whereas if you're a psychopathic leader, there won't be any of that.
Right. But I'm thinking, like you say, because intent's hard to see. Like, how do you know? I mean, is it just a question of over time you kind of you start to recognize the pattern?
I think so. Also, you'll see that Uh, they divide it. So one of the ways that they do it is they go into someone's office, talk to them alone, and then they'll go to someone else's office, and then they paint a different picture. They make sure that people don't unite against them. So if they find that someone has a little bit too much power, too much, a strong leadership sense, they'll start, you know, they'll start hurting that person's reputation, so that they keep, so they really, it's kind of a, they manipulate, and they make sure that they keep control and power at all times.
Yeah.
So the lying also is another way to distinguish both, right? You can be a tough leader, but you can be honest. Integrity,
Mm.
honesty, integrity is the H factor in personality that really is this the strongest factor associated with all three dark personalities. So just the lying all the time, and psychopaths lie, not and so narcissists lie. When they lie, they have a purpose. Psychopaths lie all the time for anything. You can ask them what they ate last night, and they'll lie about that, right?
Mm.
And so that's another way of distinguishing, like the lack of integrity, the lying, and the manipulation that you won't see in we can call them tough leaders that are fair but are honest, right?
Oh, it's so true. I just wanted to go back to something I was just thinking about when you said, like, why are people, why do people not see it? And I keep thinking about the inability of some people, especially sort of empathic people, to imagine these people exist.
Right.
And I mean, I feel like that's their camouflage. I feel like on some level, they know that people are like this,
Hmm.
and that gives them so much freedom.
Right. Exactly.
Hmm.
Like it's like a chameleon, right? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I mean they
Yep.
just take the color of the different environments that they're in. And that makes it so difficult for people who are able to feel emotions, to experience the world in a certain way, to understand that there are people that look like them, and that oftentimes in organization look pretty successful, right? They
Yeah.
dress well, they express themselves well, they take up a lot of room, they're very charismatic, and And yeah, it's hard for them to understand that this person doesn't want what's best for me at all. And it's this, I saw the same thing when I was working. I was when I was doing therapy for intimate partner abuse. I was working with the perpetrators, right? I didn't work
Mm,
with the victims. I worked with the perpetrators, and that was the thing, is a lot of the victims were thinking eventually they'll realize eventually that they're hurting
mm,
me, eventually they'll realize what they, what they've done, that they've done me wrong eventually. So there's kind of this hope that eventually these individuals will come to regret it, they'll come to
yeah.
understand, they'll say they're sorry. So there's part of that. We're we're most humans want to be optimistic about the human
Yeah.
race. I think it's in us, and it's hard. It's hard to understand. Like you said it. It was even hard for you, who understands the concept, to try to put yourself in someone else's, uh, you know, position, and understand what is it like. What is it like
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
that way?
Because I've tried to not care about things, especially like my 20s, like 30s, whatever. Like, I'm so mad, I'm not going to care about this. And like, it never lasts because, like, at some point, my heart's like, oh my God, I feel so bad for them.
Yep.
Like, I'm just really bad at not caring, you know?
That's a good thing.
I know, but
It
I mean,
is a good thing.
I tried. So another question I'm thinking about is, so once you have a sort of dark personality that's entrenched in leadership, is there, is there a realistic path to dealing with their damage without like a massive organizational overhaul?
There is, but it's rarely applied.
Hmm.
HR has to be part of it. The problem with a lot of organizations is HR that isn't given the power. So the victims raise, flags. So, whistleblowers go in and say, well, there's a problem. But oftentimes what they get is, maybe you shouldn't
Hmm.
raise that. Think about your career. Think about your future in the company. Are you sure you want to? That's what they get. And often and HR are there often to protect upper management, protect the company's
Yeah.
image. And so if these individuals are in leadership positions, you absolutely have to have either the board or upper management support any initiative to address the behavior in the individual. The problem is it's what we see is like, it's this one employee or group of employees saying there's a problem here, but they're alone, and they end up being the ones retaliated against. So if it's very well organized, you have anti-harassment policies, you have incivility policies, you have anti-fraud policies. If you have these things, and you have anonymous channels, confidential channels where people can report not just fraud but unethical interpersonal behavior, um, that really helps in gaining a lot of facts and to be able to intervene. But then it takes resources, it takes courage. And remember, these individuals, if they're in a leadership position, they have a lot of power. They know people, and they know things about the organization because they make it their business to know a lot of things
Hmm.
about people around them, their personal lives, the way that they conduct business. So there's a lot of damage that can be done if you wish to address it. Is it possible? Have I seen it being done effectively? Yes, it is possible,
Hmm.
and it's amazing. You know how people say, "Oh, it takes time to change a culture." I hear that all the time. I don't believe it's true. I don't.
Hmm.
I think it. Yes, it takes some time, but it takes the right leaders. So I've seen in organizations when they're able to pull their resources and address the toxic leader. When once this person is removed, it's almost instantaneous.
Hmm.
People feel relieved. People feel they thank the the group that's helped them. They're not afraid anymore. You see, productivity go up, morale, psychological well-being. So you've got engagement, and then people are like, yes, we're now, we've been protected. They've acted. So now there's trust. Because the problem with these leaders is there's fake trust, that people follow them because they're afraid, but there's no actual real trusting relationship, and it's not a safe. It looks like a safe relationship, but the danger's from within. They say they protect you from the danger on the outside, but they
Yes.
actually create the danger from within, right?
What you're describing sounds very difficult because you have to maneuver around a psychopath that's got their fingers everywhere
Exactly.
and quietly unite everybody or the important people in such a way that the psychopath doesn't know.
Exactly.
That's hard.
It is. It is. And then you have to figure out who's with them
Yes.
and who's not. So, because if you make a mistake and then you bring in someone who's loyal to the psychopath, then they'll report everything you're doing. So you'll see oftentimes what victims would tell me within organizations is right before they want to bring forward a harassment suit or complaint against the individual, that individual, will bring the complaint against the victim.
Yes.
And then you're stuck again in trying to understand that. And then a lot of organizations will see it as, oh, this is just a personality conflict. Let's negotiate. And so they don't see it as harassment, or they file a complaint against the company for wrongful termination. So it becomes quite the fight. So what do we see is a buyout, like a cash out, where they'll just say, sign this, you'll get that amount of money, and promise that you will not, reveal anything about our organization or tarnish our reputation. So, and then these individuals just go on to another organization. And oftentimes, and I'm telling you, Mark, this is remarkable, they usually get a better position elsewhere.
How is that? I mean, how is that? How does that work?
I mean, in the different research and books I've read on psychopathy, you get information on how easily even psychologists and psychiatrists who are trained on psychopathy, how easily they get manipulated within prison settings. So imagine how easy it is for them to manipulate whoever is in charge of an employee selection or leader selection process. I mean, I teach my HR students dark personalities. I think it's essential. I want them to understand. And I tell them the first skill you need to be looking for in a leader is humility. No humility, that leader won't be able to learn. But most don't learn about that. And so it's easy for them to manipulate their way in.
It is. I have this thought about some HR departments that I've interacted with. I feel like they get so caught up in minutia. Somebody looked at me a certain way, somebody didn't use the right pronouns, and I'm like, guys, that's not important shit compared to like a psychopath in the system. Like that's the stuff we have to learn.
Yeah, and it's the lack of humanity, really. Right? You want an organization that feels safe. You want an organization that just is open to having and to celebrating differences, whatever they are, whether it's personality, gender, whatever it is. That's what you want, because every employee will be at their best if they feel that they belong, if they feel respected, and if they feel safe. So that's it's not very complicated. Good leadership is about caring about your employees, supporting them and
Yeah.
giving them what they want. But we need to redefine leadership is one thing. We need to redefine success and look at not
Hmm.
just where the person is at or what they've achieved, but how they achieved it is for me
That's
key.
good. That's good. I love that you talk about we need to define leadership, like what good leadership is. Something I'm thinking about, one of the things I've seen in these kinds of organizations is the level of demoralization is very high because the feels like the people don't feel like they have agency
Mm-hmm.
of any kind. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the things you see in an organization that's run by a person like this? What are some of the psychological after effects you see in people?
Well, I mean, doubting themselves. Um, and sometimes people say, oh, burnout, but it's not just burnout. It's depression, anxiety disorders. It could even lead to suicide. And there are a lot of research that are coming out on trauma in organizations. So in those settings, you'll also see post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people, when I write about that on LinkedIn or somewhere else, people say, well, that's going a little bit far, post-traumatic stress. No, it's
Mhm.
absolutely post-traumatic stress disorder. I've seen it in employees who have physical reactions even when they drive by their work.
Mhm.
Physical reactions, strong physical reactions. So
Mhm.
some employees, I mean, you will see heart problems, you will see a lot of physical problems as well. Remember an employee telling me they were so stressed at work, and their boss was so toxic that they had a heart attack, and it was kind of an ongoing heart problem. And he was saying that while he was waiting to see the heart surgeon for an intervention, there was another employee from the same company having the same heart problems with the same boss. And he was saying we don't often look at the impact that these leaders can have on not just the mental aspect or psychological aspect, but even the physical well-being of employees, and that can last for a long time.
Yeah. I wonder in your position, do you look at big, like, do you ever watch the news and look at like massive corporations and decisions being made, and quietly in your mind, you're like, yep, there it is. There's a personality. Do you ever like just do that quietly?
I try not to, but it's it's like you and emotions and not caring. It's hard. It's hard not to. I mean, Robert Hare, there's on YouTube, you can find it. I think it was
Mm.
called The Corporation. He actually compared
Oh,
corporations.
the movie, the
Yeah,
movie,
yeah,
I
yeah.
love that movie. I
So, I
love
mean,
that movie.
you can still access it. And then he goes through the 20 different facets of psychopathy, and then he applies it not to an individual but to a corporation.
Yeah.
And it's really very interesting, the way that we see success in corporations very similar to how we see success in leadership.
Yeah.
But you have to think that these corporations don't run themselves.
Yes.
So if you find psychopathy in a corporation, it's because the people who run it probably have some of those traits as well, right? Because the culture and the decisions are made by individuals. It's not an
Yes.
entity. It's actual
Yes. And
people.
I've been wondering as well, because I look at certain systems or certain bureaucracies
Hmm.
that operate in a way, and I go, that's psychopathic, that decision's psychopathic. And I wonder sometimes, is there still a psychopath running it, or has the system been running that way so long
Right?
that good empathic people continue doing those things that are psychopathic?
Because they think that that's what's needed to. So that's the thing that happens is if you have upper management that is operating like a psychopath would, then all of your leadership selection process will be geared towards trying to find leaders that align with that philosophy, with that culture. So it just perpetuates the leadership kind of profile. And then you've got individuals who are going to be thinking, well, this is what I need to be doing because everybody else is doing it. And this is what I need to be doing to keep my. So sometimes it's not just about personal profit or wanting, to gain access to leadership positions. Sometimes it's just people needing their
Yeah.
jobs.
Yes. Yes.
They need money to pay
Yes.
for rent so they're looking at what is this organization having me do, and then they fall into the traps. And once you're in there, and I've spoken to so many people, is you get in it and then you get sucked into certain behaviors, certain, unethical practices. But once you've started, then you know that you're part of the problem. So a lot of
Yeah.
these employees you were talking about are unhappy because they've got this form of cognitive dissonance where their actions and their work doesn't align with their values. And that's true
Right.
for a lot of individuals, mostly in toxic workplaces.
Right. And I'm wondering if more people actually have moral injury than than realize. Like a
Of
lot of
course.
people have a kind of moral injury that they haven't even become aware of because they're breaking their own code of conduct, their code of goodness.
See, I was talking last week, I think, about how we're giving, resilience programs to employees trying to increase their resilience. And I keep saying the only people who are comfortable and happy and thriving in a toxic workplace are toxic people. So, I mean, we need to understand that, what you were talking about, that feeling of fear, that feeling of unease, that what you described in the coffee shop, um, those feelings are not normal. And they're a
Mm.
sign that something's wrong. But as humans, we're being told, just tough it out, keep on, keep
Yeah.
going, don't think about it. Nothing's perfect, right? We hear that all the time. Nothing's perfect. You want to go somewhere else. It's not perfect, but it's actually probably healthy to feel anxious, to feel depressed, to not feel well if you're in that type of environment. The problem is we don't question the environment. We question the employee. Are they tough enough?
Yes.
Right?
And also, I must be wrong for feeling these things I'm feeling.
Exactly.
It's my fault.
The others seems like they can manage. So,
Yeah.
right?
You've answered this next question I want to ask you already to some degree, but I know there are people in my audience that feel trapped,
Mm-hmm.
Like what advice do you have, for someone who suspects their boss or their coworker is a corporate psychopath, but they feel like they don't know what to do. And so they're just devolving internally.
I think the first thing would be make sure that you get help. You need
Mm.
support. If that's the case, if you're suspecting that, it's probably because it already affected you. So outside of work, try to get as much support as possible, whether it's your, friends, but maybe professional support also. And start looking at how are they operating? How are they treating others? And look at what type of power do they have. So a lot of people will say, well, you have to fight it. If you just exit the organization, then you're letting it go on. At the same time, is there a chance for you to win this? That's the question you have
Mm.
to ask yourself. Am I strong enough? Am I healthy enough to fight this situation, to address this situation? And is there a possibility, what's my percentage of chances that I'll be able to win
Yes.
this? If you don't
Yes.
have support from HR, if you don't have support from the organization, the system as a whole, if you don't have upper management support, then chances are this person has been operating that way for a long time.
Yeah.
And no one will intervene, and the only person who's going to be suffering is probably you. So I would say protect yourself, keep a distance, try to see what your options are. If you think that the organization can support you, then I would say yes, you can talk to HR, you can talk to maybe another supervisor, but it's always a risk. If you actually suspect someone from, if you suspect that your boss is psychopathic, it means that they're probably very ruthless. And if they suspect that you're going to be going after them, then the damages can be, can be very,
It could
very
be terrible.
significant. Yeah. So I would
Yeah.
say start looking for something else, probably, but do it very quietly and organize. Start with your CV, start looking at your other options, start talking, but to the right people, but do not tell anyone, even your friends who are in the organization. Just don't
Yes.
talk about it. The weird thing is, they're very controlling. And if they think that you're doing a good job, and if you've been making them look good for the past, I don't know, 10 years, they won't want to let you go.
Mm.
So I've seen a lot of the tarnishing reputations and telling employees, if you try to leave, I'll make sure that no one else, ever hires you again.
Mm.
And those types of threats. So yeah, you'd think that they want you to leave if you're starting to see through the cracks, but not if you can provide them with good
Right.
work.
I think that's such good advice. I remember because people reach out to me and say, "Oh, I have this problem, and I have, a cult leader, the this, the that, and the other." And I say to people now that ask me directly the same advice somebody gave
Mm-hmm.
me when I first realized, okay, this guy's a psychopath. We need to do something. Somebody said to me, if you're going to strike the king, you better kill the king. Like, you can't do it
Yes.
halfway. You're going to have enough evidence to completely take him
Exactly.
down. And I say that to people now. I'm like, you can't go half-assed because they're coming after you 100
Right.
times worse than anything you could ever do.
And you have
So
to.
make sure
How did you
you know,
do? How did you do it? How did you make sure that
uh,
you were ready? I mean, and did you look at being ready not just for the facts, but psychologically? Because that's the other aspect.
none of us were ready psychologically. I was going on pure rage, but the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, we assembled a team. Now, this is interesting. And people are going to say, like, who was it? There was a psychopath in our team. And sometimes, and I don't say this often, but sometimes having a psychopath to fight a psychopath is a very useful thing. And as you know, not all psychopaths are evil.
The, and it,
You
it
know that.
depends on the problem with psychopathic individuals is that they're not loyal.
No,
So
no.
if they're on your side for a while when
Yeah,
when you want to use their skills, then that's good, but
yeah.
you never know if eventually they will turn on the group
You're
or
totally
turn
right.
on you.
And in this case, our war aligned
Okay.
until the war was over. Everybody was aware of that. But everybody unified. And we had to deal with, there were people, we were very paranoid at first. We couldn't tell people because others, somebody might go back and report to him. It was a whole battle. And one of the things we did as well, I had a buddy who lives in Alberta. And I called him and I said, we're screwed. We're screwed. This guy's coming, because he's coming after us. And he says, oh, I've fought psychopaths before. Here's what you do. And one of the pieces of advice he gave me, he said, like, you can tell people what you're doing, but give them bad information. Like, create maximum confusion in the organization, which we did. And later I found out from somebody on the inside that at a certain point they lost track because they were all supporting him. At a certain point,
Right.
they lost track of what was going on. And
Right.
even he got confused,
Right.
But these are very sophisticated tactics. I would
It's
never tell people to do this stuff.
Well, just, employees oftentimes feel like they don't have any power. And I will tell them, Make sure you write everything down. Make sure your interactions are always, you keep track of everything. Protect your reputation, protect your work. So those are things that, if you are to go meet with them for a difficult, discussion, bring someone else. Yeah, for employees, it's hard to get organized because then it's not just the psychological aspect of it, but you've got people around you who actually need that job. And sometimes you're in a situation where there is no possibility right now to find something else, and you still need to pay the bills. So that's when I think employees feel really trapped. And I think that's the most difficult situation, where they have awoken. They're aware of what's going on, but they cannot leave because they don't have the means to. And so that's where I'll tell employees, go out, get some new skills. At least you're in, anxiety. The worst thing about anxiety is when you're in a situation and you feel you can't do anything. So, and you're in your head and you've got all of these scenarios. And I tell people, you have to get into action, do something, have a plan. Even if it's going to be a long-term plan and you're going to have to suffer in that situation for a bit longer, it's okay, because your mind will go to, but I have a plan. I know I'm going to do something. I'm going back to get a degree. I'm doing this. I'm doing that so that I can get out of this organization and I can get, a job, or maybe I can start my own business. And once you're in that, it just shifts, and then you've got power. In a certain aspect, you don't have power there, but you know that you're going, so that helps.
Good. That's so good. Because what you're talking about is building a stable foundation for yourself.
Yes.
Because you're on such rocky ground, because then you can transition out.
Exactly. And doing it, rebuilding your self-confidence, and then getting new skills, so that that individual doesn't have as much power. They'll have power in terms of the organizational power, because they're, if they're your superior, but not on your well-being, not on the amount of work you'll do, not on. So and I keep telling people, work is just part of what we do. It's a big part of what we do as human beings, but there's life, and that's so much more important.
That's very good advice. I was thinking about something as you were saying all this, that it's important for people to know that if you feel bad in a job, that's not normal.
Exactly.
Right? Because I think everybody's supposed, it's just normal. It's just that's how it is.
It's not. It's not. If everybody feels burnt out. No. Burnout is your body and your brain's way of telling you something's wrong. You need to do something. And so we've normalized, and then we go into the doctor's office and say, and I've seen it when I was doing clinical psychology, people coming in and saying, okay, I want this fixed. How long do you think it'll take? And then and it's not a pill. And a lot of people will say, oh, I'll just go in and numb. And I'm not against medication at all. It's not that, but we also have to look at the causes. So why am I feeling that way? What's going on in my workplace to make me feel sick and tired and not being able to enjoy the rest of my life? Right?
Which any good therapist would ask you if you go to therapy.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, to circle back, that's when I realized that these individuals were in the workplace, was when I started asking people, what's going on? Why are you feeling that way? Is it your job? Is it what you do? Are you unsatisfied with the tasks and it's no, I love my job. No, this is not it. And then you look at, leadership. Yeah, my leader's this and that. And then you start looking at the behaviors, the traits, the profile. And that's when and it kept happening. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, that can't be, these individuals, it's the same profile that I'm studying in prison settings. And that's when people start to understand, okay, it's not me. It's not me. It's not me that's the problem. It's not that I'm weak. It's not that I'm, not good at my job.
Do you ever have a fantasy of like requiring leaders to have brain scans? I have it all the time. That's why I'm asking.
I mean, we've been working on, yeah, I mean, we've been working on a measure of corporate psychopathy.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
for 15 years. Yeah, yeah. And
But
it's
with scans?
mm-mm.
No.
The
Okay.
problem with all of that is then you get into is psychopathy. I was on a panel with experts on psychopathy. Is psychopathy a mental disorder? Should it be considered a mental disorder? Is it a personality disorder? If the brain scans can identify psychopathy, then what does it say? Right? Is it could it be considered as more than just a personality disorder? And I wish that there was one way
Mm,
that there was a way to identify individuals who have uh, a lot of those traits.
mm,
And then a lot of people will say, well, don't you need these traits to be a good salesman, for example, to be a good leader,
mm.
for example, or in certain, like, in finance or in, and I say, you don't. Some of the traits that they have are good for business.
Hmm.
Being extroverted, being goal oriented, that's all good. But
Mm.
so we don't have to erase that, but it has
No.
to be combined with empathy, with
Mm.
integrity, with humility. So those are important elements, and I wish people understood more that good leaders don't trigger anger in you. They don't
Yeah.
trigger those negative emotions. That's not how they lead. And I wish people saw leadership in a different way.
Yeah. I was just thinking about sales for a second when you said it. I mean, sales is sales. But the question is, are you selling something to somebody using all of your skills that they don't need, that's not good for them, versus you're doing an exchange with them. You have something, and they have something. You guys do an exchange, and you each
Exactly.
get to enact your values.
But for that, you have to have the ability and the desire for the other person's well-being.
Yes, and the ability to back away when you realize this is not good for them.
Exactly. And the
Yeah.
ability to care.
Yes.
That's not good for
That
them.
that's important.
So to your question, it could never be done, this can thing, but I
I wish
wish,
so.
well, there are ways that people can positively, identify good leaders and reduce the risks of hiring psychopaths as leaders.
Well, let's
Emotion,
talk about that.
yeah.
How do you, in your ideal world, what would that be?
Test for emotional intelligence, humility. So stop being impressed with the people who are boastful and charismatic, and look at what have they actually done and how did they do it? How did they achieve it? You and have structured interviews where I teach my students to use behavior based questions, where because it's harder to lie. You ask them, give me an example of, and then they reply. It's a lot tougher to lie in those when you have to give an actual example than just saying, what do you think a good leader is? So right,
Uh,
because they could give you the textbook thing. So looking for those positive traits that these individuals will score low on because they see that as a weakness. So empathy and taking care of others and caring about employees and caring about the organization, all of that, they see that as weaknesses, so they're not likely to lie on those. So we did the last study we did on employee selection. We looked at psychopathy and tests that are normally used in IO psychology and see how do they score. So they scored high on impulsivity. They scored high on aggressivity in the way that they deal with conflict, but they scored really low in anything that had to do with collaborating with others, understanding of others, openness to others. And then in this last study I did, I was looking at psychopathy and racism and gender bias, and of course they scored high on all those things.
mm,
Whereas I mean, there's one way to be and there's the right way to be, and it's their way.
Right, because if you're dehumanizing anybody, likely it's higher in psychopathy. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
So there are ways, but for that we have to change the way that we see success in organizations and look at the long-term success, right?
Yeah,
Because the
I love
psychopath
that.
is going to get you something really fast, but he's going to break all of the rules and all of the bridges and all of the and leave a trail of disaster and human
Destruction, yeah.
disaster behind.
What you're describing is also like the process of growing up. I mean, when you're a kid, you're impulsive. As you grow older, you start having longer term thinking.
Hmm.
It's growing up,
Yeah.
and these people are stuck somewhere.
Yeah, that maturity that never happens. And in,
Hmm.
in many movies, they try to describe psychopaths and they say, oh, this person is psychopathic, but then they're very well structured. They think long term, they plan ahead. Psychopaths rarely do that. Rarely do
This
that.
is this is my irritation at the entertainment industry, which I am part of, and it's the glamorization of
Yes.
psychopathy.
Yes.
They make it so damn attractive, and I'm like, I look at some of these movies and I go, you realize you're making really, really bad people the model of what we should be.
And we see that in science too. There's a line of study, and they call corporate psychopaths successful psychopaths, and I don't like it. I've never liked it, and I've said it in at psychopathy conventions, and we've talked about it in a chapter we just wrote with Robert Hare, where if you call a psychopath successful, it says a lot about how about your own values. So, and there's this glorification of, oh, they were able to be successful at what? Look at the impact of what they do. Successful at manipulating society, but then you could say the same for psychopaths in prison who, murdered people and say, well, they were successful. They were successful at manipulating individuals as well in what they wanted to achieve. But yeah, I don't like the term. I've never used
Right.
it. I understand that some researchers don't view it that way, and there's no ill intent in calling them successful. But I've really I don't like the term because again,
I hear you.
it's the
Because
same.
by that metric, Adolf Hitler was successful.
Everybody who gets what they want is successful, regardless of the impact on others, right?
Oh, Lord. Okay, let me ask you this question. We're almost done, but so has studying these personalities changed you, like changed how you see, human beings? Are you more cynical?
I'm not more cynical. I think I'm more aware. I'm more aware. Some of the traits, like you said, when you and your wife go somewhere and you use things or you see things or you see certain individuals and their charisma, you see people being at awe with these individuals. You think to yourself, you shouldn't be. You shouldn't.
Mm,
So it makes it sometimes more difficult for me to navigate life, because I can see some things that maybe people don't, and I'm always wary of the impact on others. That's why I do what I do, is to raise awareness, to make sure that the damages are not as significant as they could be. But it hasn't changed. I've always been extremely optimistic.
mm,
I think I'm naturally very positive, which is kind
mm,
of odd because when people meet me, they wouldn't think I'm studying corporate psychopathy. It doesn't fit with
mm, mm,
who I am. I've I've always been optimistic, and I think
mm.
once people are taught, they know, they can see, and then they can understand. And it's not about acting without empathy. And the goal is never to identify everyone as a psychopath and start being aggressive towards them. So that's never been the goal. It's about understanding how others can react, and the impacts that these individuals can have on you and on society. But it hasn't changed my optimism. Oddly, I don't know why. I can't say why, but it hasn't.
That's interesting.
I still think that human beings are capable of so much positivity, and I still see it all the time, and I see the resilience. And working, and lately in the past year, there were a lot of whistleblowers who contacted me, and I've started studying the protection of whistleblowers in organizations, and the lack of protection and the retaliation as one of the biggest elements of a toxic culture. But these individuals, and when I read your story before I said yes to this podcast, this has given me hope, because there's also strength in the people who are willing to expose these individuals
Yes.
and what they do, and that movement, that strength, I think is always there, and I think that's
Yeah.
what I focus on.
I love that. I love that. I'll tell you why I love it, because over the last few years, making this film, I have been trying to get stories about, malignant narcissism in the workplace, and people would privately tell me the stories, but they say I can't go on camera because they're so terrified.
Yes.
So it gives me great hope to hear that people are reaching out to you more and more.
They are, and I think people need to see those films. They need to hear others. They need to understand that what's going on. And one of the things that people have said to me the most is, I now understand. I didn't understand what was going on. It was a blur. I just knew that I wasn't well. I knew that this person was probably, not good, was probably, hurting the organization, hurting us as employees, but I couldn't understand what was going on. It was kind of, I
Mm.
couldn't understand it. So once people understand, then their eyes are open, and they can start looking at, how can I protect myself? So this is what's going on. And even if I go and talk to this person, they're not going to change. They're not going to start being nicer to us. They're not going to, right? And so, this is manipulation. Okay, I'm being manipulated. What do I do about it? And so we need, and I'm not, I can't do what you do. So I do research. That's my strength.
Mm.
But we need
Mm.
people who have the courage and the strength to teach
Mm.
others about what's going on. I think that really is something that gives me hope. And when I watch, these shows, and I'm thinking, wow, yes. So a lot of people are going to see that. A lot of people are going to feel that they're not alone, and that
Yeah.
there's a way. There, some
Yeah.
people have gotten out of it. You have. If you
Yeah.
can do it, a lot of people can, right?
Yeah. What you're saying is such a gift to be able to have people make sense of what they were going through and not feel crazy anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Not feel like
Yeah.
they're their problem.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
the organizations, they're structured in a way that anyone who brings up problems, who's a dissident from, what the culture is telling you should do, and you should be, and you should believe in, they're the problems. Not the culture, not the leader. You're the problem. Everybody else falls in line. Why don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Please step back inside the box, right?
So true. I have had the best conversation with you. This has been
I've really
great.
enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. Just one last thing. Where can people find you online if they want to, follow you in some way?
Yeah, I have a website, cynthiamathieu.com, but I'm very active I've been for the past year and a half on LinkedIn, where every time I read something or find or publish new research, I'll put it on LinkedIn. So I post every week on my findings on corporate psychopathy, on toxic leadership. So I post all the time. I've really enjoyed, and I find that the discussions the people, what they are willing to write, they write about their experiences, and then you've got experts from around the world intervening as well. I think that really has motivated me. It's given me a lot of energy and the will to continue working on. So it's what others write, and you see, okay, I'm not just this one, because as academics, you publish papers nobody reads, right? Let's just be honest, or other experts read. But what I really want is to be able to bring that knowledge to the people who need it, organizations and HR professionals and employees. So that's one way. That's my way of doing it.
I like it.
Yeah.
And I think didn't you start a YouTube channel at some point?
I did. I don't know if it's not my forte, but I did. So sometimes sometimes I don't feel like writing, so I'll post something on YouTube on trying to.
I hate writing, so I prefer talking.
That's why you do what you do, and you do it well.
Exactly. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna make sure that I put the link to your book in the show notes as well, so people can check it out.
Thank you. And
I've learned a lot.
And thank you for making this real, and for asking, the real questions, and not making psychopathy, not glorifying psychopathy. I think that's going to be very helpful for people who are suffering from being in contact with these individuals in the workplace. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And to my audience, as always, please stay curious.